And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Weekly Show. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us this morning. We do have a guest that many of you probably have seen sitting over there, but he's usually with his own guest. Today we get to grill him. His name's Jim Chapman. Jim, welcome to the show this morning.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here and glad to be on the other side of the...
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. I know that I'd said to you, because we've been doing a lot of these together, except I'm kind of that voice that pops up in the background of yours, that we've been doing a lot of these together. And I was like, well, we need to get into, this series, why you like podcasts and that sort of thing, kind of get to know the guy behind the interview. So that's why we're here today. So we're going to jump into it. So, how'd you get into it? How'd you get into podcasting? What sort of pushed you in that direction?
Well, I've been a podcast fan for a long, long time. So when I first started watching and listening to podcasts, and I want to kind of sidebar this a little bit and explain. Vlogs and podcasting are different, but we call them podcasts because nobody knows what vlogs mean. So vlog is basically a blog in video, right, and they shorten it and they call it vlog. So I do both through the Local Leaders podcast. I do a video version and I do an audio version. I call them all podcasts, but if you want to be technical, I have a vlog and I have a podcast, sure, audio and video version. That's the only difference. Now, to answer your question, what got me into podcasting was many, many years ago, probably 10 years ago, I started watching podcasts. This was something I could do while I was stuck in traffic. This was something I could do while I was working in the yard, and I am someone who always seeks information. So I'm not much of a TV guy where I'll sit down and watch a 2-hour movie. So, but when you listen to a podcast, you usually learn something if it's something you have an interest in. They've got podcasts on every subject in the world. They have podcasts that deal with how to fix a car, how to paint a house, whatever you're into, they have podcasts for it. So it was a great outlet for me to get information. And so that's what kind of got me into what podcasting was. Now, I branched through that and I started thinking, this is a great outlet for me to get information out there to people. That's where I started doing a paint podcast initially, and that has now branched into a podcast I call Local Leaders, the podcast.
So before we start talking about Local Leaders, which is why you're here, for those of you watching the video, you can see it right there on his shirt. It's a very cool logo. We want to ask you or kind of get to know the background. So you've got 10 years of experience with podcasting. Where'd you start? What did you start listening to? And what are some of the ones you enjoy today?
So I started initially listening to historical podcasts. So it might be very boring if you're not into history. I am into history. So I started listening to podcasts. I can't even remember the names or titles of some of these podcasters, but they would talk about different subjects of American history that I was into, and I would listen to those while I was in the backyard, doing whatever it was I was doing, cutting the grass or whatever. And that's how I kind of got started. Joe Rogan is a podcast. I don't necessarily agree with all of what Joe Rogan says, but he has some really amazing guests. And so he's probably the podcast I listen to the most. And then the second most is a guy named Jocko Willenick. I believe that's how you pronounce his last name. And Jocko hosts a leadership podcast. He was a former Navy SEAL who now has a fledgling company that goes all over the country helping, large companies like Apple and folks like that, helping their employees through leadership. He has a fantastic podcast if you're interested in a national podcast on leadership. He also wrote a book that I was a big fan of called The Dichotomy of Leadership. And it's an amazing book. And it basically covers how Navy SEALs were trained in leadership and how they function as a unit. And it's just amazing. Great book. All of that being said, those are the ones I like to listen to.
So tell us a little bit about how those, especially the ones you've listened to more recently, have sort of affected your style and the way that you want to produce a podcast, conduct the interview, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So with both Joe Rogan and Jocko, and I'm going to take Joe Rogan as an example. For those of you that aren't familiar with him, he has the largest podcast following in the world. And he is an amazing interviewer. He has people on there that you would not, if you're anybody with any popularity in the world, you would want to get on Joe Rogan's podcast. His following is that bigger than any TV show or TV outlet network that you're ever going to get on. It's humongous, millions and millions of views a day. So one thing that Joe Rogan does better than anybody else is Joe Rogan sits down and he just has a conversation. He's a lot like the way I have kind of formed my podcast. When I sit down with a guest, whether it is Trisha Johnston, whether it is Becky Sims, whether it is James Adam McCants, these are people that I've sat down with. When I sit down with them, it's because I want to talk to them. It's because I have a genuine interest in learning about them. And all we're doing is we're having a conversation. We're having a conversation. We just happen to be filming it and recording it. And I don't know. I'm sure for some of the your listeners out there, they've talked on the phone to somebody before and they've said, man, I wish I recorded that conversation, whether it be funny or whether it be inspiring. It's basically the same situation with me. One thing that Joe Rogan does that is very, very good is when he sits you down and he talks to you about whatever it is you do, he's just talking to you. It's not like a 60 Minutes interview where you're sitting down and you've basically got a script of things that you want to ask whoever it is you're talking to, and it's very firm and it doesn't branch out. It doesn't deviate from that script. I can sit down wanting to talk to you about one thing, and by the time we're done, we have deviated way off track.
Yeah, as we were trying to get set up this morning, I mean, we talked about several different things. We talked about lineage. We talked about our grandfathers. We had several different conversations, and it just sort of flowed through. And that seems to be your conversational style.
It really is. And the end goal is I want to sit down with these leaders. McHugh, I can't tell you how interesting I find it and how interesting a lot of people find it. We're getting a lot of views locally. I can't tell you how interesting I find it to sit down and talk to a business owner. One of my mantras with the Local Leaders podcast is every business owner has a story. Every business owner. You're a business owner. I'm a business owner. We've all had struggles. You had to start somewhere. And you kind of branch up from that starting point. Well, there's a story there. There's something people need to hear. Whether you're selling a product, whether you're pushing a service, one thing that you have to keep in mind is when someone learns who you are and the struggle that you had to go through to get there, they're more apt to buy whatever it is you're selling. And that's because they know who you are inside. And that's what I try to bring out in that podcast. If you're someone that does pest control, you're more than that. There was a struggle to start that pest control company. There's a story there that people need to hear. And through that story, hopefully, someone will feel like, hey, I want to do business with that guy. Or I want to do business with that realtor. Those sorts of things. So that's the goal of the podcast.
So that's the goal of the podcast, but it's like you said, so we want to ask that question of you. Where did it start? When you were sitting down thinking about it and you were like, I'm into podcasts, I've done some personal vlogging stuff, but this is something that I want to do. What was that thought process?
Good question. And I've got a pretty good answer for you. So here's the thing. What I think what makes me somewhat interesting and somewhat skilled in that is I work for a company that is a family-owned company as my full-time job. I work for a company that is privately owned. I know exactly what the struggle is to get your name out there. I fight against corporate America, these Fortune 500 companies that are public, that dominate the advertising landscape. So I had to innovate, McHugh. I had to innovate early on in my career and figure out, man, I have got to get my company's name out there. And they are not going to advertise, on $1 million commercials. They're not going to put their logo on the back of Yankee Stadium. It ain't going to happen ever. Doesn't matter how successful they are. That is not going to happen because that's who those people are. It has to make sense to them. They're not just looking for a tax write-off. So I had to innovate. Guess what I had to do? I had to figure out a lot of interesting ways that I could get the name of my company out there. And after, 20 years of just really digging in deep and trying everything I could to get Farrell Calhoun's name out there, I was able to do it. And I think I've done a pretty good job in this market of doing that. So to answer your question, that's where this was born, because I know the struggle of that, and I want to help. My goal with this whole thing is just to help local, family-owned business compete with public business by giving them an outlet in which they can get their message out. Because people don't buy a product, people buy from people. If you're selling a screwdriver, just pick a screwdriver, and I'm selling a screwdriver, and I'm a privately owned business, and you're a public big box store, why should they buy the screwdriver from me? Maybe my screwdriver's 2 cents more than your screwdriver. But you know what? If they know who I am, and as a person and the struggle I've been through, and the value that I bring to them buying from me, maybe they'll buy it just because of that. That's what podcasting gives you. It's long form podcasting. It's not 7 minutes of tell me who you are and what you do, and then I'm going to send you down the road. It's an hour of us talking about what got you to where you are and why do you do what you do. You're not just telling the story of what you do, you're telling why you do it. When you get to the why of what somebody does, it makes you want to support them. And we have a beautiful community here. The majority of people in Livingston Parish are business owners of one type or another. There's a lot of them in this community. And I just want to give them an outlet to tell their story. It's very important to me, always been very important to me. Local business and family-owned business are the backbone of the entire country. They produce more jobs than private business does. A lot of people don't realize that. They think private business dominates the job sector. They do not. As a matter of fact, in the last 10 years, private business has hired more than public business. Public business has cut jobs. Private business has increased jobs in most cases.
So, a lot of that is about not just the business itself, but as you've kind of brought it together there at the end, there's a community aspect to what you're trying to do as well. So tell me a little bit about how you're hoping to influence your community.
Well, everybody knows what today is. I picked a great day to do a podcast.
Right. Didn't you know? We talked about it before we started. What he is alluding to today is probably, I guess, for some people, yesterday was the anniversary. For probably more people, today is the anniversary of the flood and when water started coming into people's houses. So,
yeah. So, I'm sure I was like everybody else. I woke up this morning, I popped the phone open, pulled up Facebook, and people are posting pictures. And I got a little emotional this morning looking at these pictures. For most of us, we were impacted in one way or the other. If you didn't flood, you had a best friend that did.
Right.
You had a mother that did. You had a business that did. And so everybody in one way or another in this community was impacted. We were talking about this earlier before the podcast. It changed me in a lot of ways for the better. What I did was I saw the absolute best of Livingston Parish during that time. And those of you who went through this know exactly what I'm talking about. You can't even put it into words, but it was the best in people. And, you know, I had love for my parish prior to that. Now you can't even put into words the emotion that I feel for Livingston Parish and always will. And so I wanted to help all of these great people of this parish by starting a podcast where, you know, it sounds almost cliche-ish, but it's like, I want everybody to be a star. I want you to get on this show and you're on your own TV show for that one day and you tell people why you do what you do. And I just hit the table and probably
that's okay. You
tell people why you do what you do and let them see that emotion out of you. And in that will bring you where you want to be in your business, because your name's got to get out there somehow. And I'm telling you, podcasting is the way to do it. Podcasting is now surpassing all other forms of advertisement for one reason or another. I think the DVR has a lot to do with that. People DVR things now and they fast forward right through those commercials, things like that. Podcasting is a way where the commercials don't water down the podcast. You'll hear a few little advertisements in there. Any advertisements that I do, those will all be local people from this community and it's very important to note, these people are wanting to support this podcast. They are doing it because they love the community. And they're doing it because it helps get their name out there. But they're really primarily doing it because they believe in this project and they want to support it.
So let's talk about those people. You know, in order to have a podcast, especially an interview or conversational podcast, you got to have somebody sitting across from you. How do you pick those people? What's your process there? We're getting into the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah. So as we discussed earlier, I want to talk to people. You know, there's nothing better to me than sitting down and talking to a business owner. So when I choose people for my podcast, I'm choosing people that I want to talk to. I'm being selfish there. I'm basically, you know, I'm basically saying, you know, I really want to know what makes James Adam McCants tick. He is an interesting cat, so to speak. And he is, by the way. But I really want to know what makes him tick and what makes him successful in his business, because not only will that help me, because I grow, McHugh, every day. I grow every day by talking to business owners. So not only does it help me, but it helps the listener. It helps someone, because maybe James at one point was in the spot that they're in now. And so he's getting his story out and they're learning through that. So that's one way I choose them, is just out of total selfishness, that I just want to hear their story personally. But the other way I choose them is they're leaders. You know, I'm not going to have people on my show that I don't feel are going to benefit the listener. These are usually going to be people that are pretty well known and pretty successful in this community, or maybe they're people that aren't that well known, but they're very, very good at what they do in their business. So that's kind of how that process works. Livingston Parish is where I focus these business owners. You know, kind of a saying that I say is, you work, live, or play in Livingston Parish. So it's someone, you don't necessarily have to live, you know, inside the parish itself, but you do a lot of work in the parish, you know, and you're well known in the parish. Or maybe your office is in Baton Rouge, but you live in Livingston Parish. So that means you spend your money here. And so I want you on my show. I want to talk to you. But I try to stay as local as possible with this. All of my guests have either lived in Livingston Parish or they have a business in this parish.
So you're talking about, and there's a question I had later that you're probably going to end up answering, but I might ask you to condense it. But first, you're talking about bringing these people on your show, and you're talking about people who might work, live, or play here, as you said, but they're good at what they do. You know, what's the preparation like for each individual show?
That's an interesting question. And I'll tell you, it kind of varies. I'll give you two examples. I had Becky Sims on my show recently. Becky Sims owns Southern Oaks Title. She is a Livingston Parish resident. She does a lot of home closings in Livingston Parish as well. So I knew Becky prior to her coming on the show very well. Very good friends with her and her husband. I didn't have to do a whole lot of research on Becky because me and Becky sit down and talk shop all the time. So I knew exactly what I wanted to know from Becky, but I still wanted her on the show because Becky, where she benefits is to my listeners. I wanted her on the show, and we talked about kind of how she grew up in the business and what she looks for out of business. And in return, my listeners are going to learn from that. So that's her aspect. Now, I also have Woody Everton on my show. Woody Everton was someone I only knew in passing. I had met him once. Very popular podcast in his own right, a national podcast. He's a Marpole resident, but an interesting guy to say the least, and tons of subject matter there. I wanted him on my show. That was one of the selfish ones. I want to learn from Woody, but I also wanted him on my show because he was a former Livingston Parish Sheriff's detective, and he has a lot of good information there. Now, the preparation part of that was difficult. I had to do about 2 weeks of preparation before I had him on, and I kind of hyphenate that had. I didn't have to, wanted to. It was very important to me that I made Woody look as good as possible and make the interview as interesting as possible. And I felt like I would be doing Woody a disservice by not preparing properly for him. So what did I do? I read a book. Well, I listened to his book. I say read it. I listened to his book, start to finish. I Googled him to death. I printed out articles. I memorized them. I probably went way overboard. I think during the podcast, some of the looks he was giving me was like, how do you know this? And, like I was some kind of insane fan. But it was very important, and would be very important with any guest I have on the show, that I cover everything that they bring to the table and value in their business and what they do. I want to promote their business, but I also want to promote who they are, because I think that's what you get out of long form podcasting. It's kind of like political debates, McHugh. We got a presidential race coming up. In that race, you're going to have two candidates sitting up there, and you're going to have a moderator. And that moderator is going to say, you've got 45 seconds to tell us your foreign policy. Okay, come on. 45 seconds, you're going to cover foreign policy? Really? No, you're going to hit some key highlights, and that's going to be it. Long form podcasting is, we've got however much time you want to take in order to tell your story. And that's what you're getting out of that. You're not under a time constraint.
Well, I'm going to be the moderator here, and I'm going to challenge you a little bit. In 45 seconds, tell us exactly why, because you've kind of given us this big, broad stroke and very in depth about why you like having people right across from you on the mic, whether it's across this conference table here or side by side. Why? Give it to us. Give us the condensed version.
So you're asking me, why do you like bringing people onto your podcast? What is, you've talked about it from a personal angle, a community angle. You like listening to Pike. Pull it all together. I'm the moderator. I'm challenging you for that 45 seconds of foreign policy. Tell us why. I think that, I love to do it. And I think the reason I love to do it is because I feel like I'm playing a little bit of a part in that person's success. And I'm giving them an outlet they don't have. There is nothing like this in Livingston Parish. You host a podcast, and you have business owners on your podcast, and you highlight their business, where we differ is the manner in which we promote it. I massively promote podcasts with the people I have on the show. We'll get into that in a minute. But I do all of this, McHugh, really because I just want to help these people get their name out there. I am a small business shop at Carter's guy.
Right.
And I think it's a big selfish way in order to satisfy my need to push local people. And it is very important to me that they succeed because I know that struggle. I want everybody to get that. I know that struggle. I know what it's like to have to battle unlimited budgets and get your name out there. And I know how to do it.
So carry that forward. You love to do it. You're helping these local businesses get their names out there, people who are good at what they do, practice what they preach, that kind of thing. What are you what do you want for them to gain from being on your show?
I want them to gain business in the end, obviously. That's the obvious answer. But what I want them to gain more than that is I want them to gain the respect that they deserve as leaders. It doesn't matter how successful you are. You can't grasp who somebody is until you know their story. Every business owner has a story. Every single one. If you're out there right now and you're listening to this podcast and you own a business, I bet in your head you're thinking, boy, do I have a story. You're absolutely right. Guess what? I want you on my show. Let's talk about it. I want to hear it because every one of them has an interesting story. And so I think, more than anything, it's just about getting you on here and let's talk about it. We've got a lot of good guests coming up that a lot of people are going to want to hear from and everybody's familiar with, but maybe they don't know that backstory of how they ended up where they are. So I'm hoping everybody learns, including myself. I learned a lot from these people.
So you talked about those coming up. I actually have the list right here in front of me. We have Dr. Donald St. Angelo, Jeremy Powell from BJ Pawn, Dane Arnold from iTrade Exchange, me.
You?
I'll be on your show.
You indeed.
James Adam McCants from Sporting Center. I recently spoke to Jamie Fontenot, and like you said, we talked a lot about bugs, but you're going to talk a lot about him. He is, of course, expert pest services, and Miss Leanne Hasselbeck, right? That's Flooring by Design.
That's right.
So those are your guests coming up. You've also had some great guests before. What do you want your audience to gain from these interviews with these people?
Two things. I think there's audience out there that listen to me that maybe they want to start their own business, McHugh, but they're scared, and I get it. Maybe they want to start their own business. They're scared they're going to fail, or they're scared to kind of take that leap. Sometimes people can be a victim of their own success. They can be working for somebody else and they can be in a position where they make a really good living. And so in order to break even, they've got to really, really pop out and open their own business and just come out on fire. And so maybe a little inspiring there from someone that's been there, done that will help them take that leap. There is nothing more satisfying than owning your own business. And some people may be listening to me right now and they may be saying, wait a minute, you work for Farrell Calhoun. You don't own Farrell Calhoun. No, but I own about 6 other businesses. And I know what it's like to be a business owner. There's no doubt about it. I want to show you something. I brought something with me, McHugh.
Okay.
And this is interesting. Everybody's going to find this interesting. I want everybody to look at this. Okay. This is from 1985. So I was 11 years old. And I saved this my entire life. 45 now. I'm an old man. But I saved this. And what this is this is an advertisement that me and my best friend put together. His mother wrote it, by the way. At 11, we didn't have that good a penmanship. But it's an advertisement for lawn mowing services. This was my first business. Okay, and you can look on there and you'll get a little chuckle. It was $3 to edge your yard. That's all we charged. And guess what? If you wanted us to cut the front and the back, it was $10. If you just wanted the front, it's $5. So, and we would rake it for 50 cents each. No way I'm doing that now. But I show this for one reason. I have this sitting at my home office. Every day I look at it. And I remember when I first became a salesman and when I first became a business owner. It's very important to me. It's made it through a flood. It's made it through moving 100 times, since I was, 18, or not 100 times, but a lot. It's made it through life with me, and I hope I never lose it, because this was my start. So I know what it's like to start a business and have owned a business since I was 11. And I just hope everybody out there, if you're working for somebody else and you're happy in what you do, that's fantastic. But if you're wanting to take a leap, this would be the podcast that you'd want to listen to, because everybody on this podcast is going to be a business owner, and every one of these people are going to be successful business owners. I mean, we're not going to have people that's failed at business. We're going to have people that have succeeded at business but started from zero. So it'll be interesting.
So let's take that you just showed, that interesting little advertisement, your first little sort of business card, I guess you can say. Part of what you're doing with this podcast is distribution. I mean, that's the back end. You had to get the why, your want. Why did you want to do this? You started picking people. You brought them in. You do the interview, but there's still work to do. You still got to promote it. So talk to us a little bit about where you distribute, how you distribute, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, this idea didn't come up overnight. This is something that I have been mulling around and playing with for 3 or 4 years now. I have been kind of honing my skills, McHugh, in podcasting. And in that, I knew with a podcast, I didn't want to just put a podcast out there and then that be it. I wanted to promote this person. Like I said, I work for a company where promotion is not necessarily priority. Priority is the quality of the paint. But if you're going to promote it, you as a sales rep, you better figure out how to do it yourself. So I really kind of honed my skills in promoting through struggle, through having to force myself to learn that. So I went out and I got certified in a lot of social media things. I'm a certified social marketing professional with Hootsuite. And these are all exam-based certifications. You basically go online and you've got to do a lot of modules and then you take a test. So I'm Google Analytics IQ certified. I hold a social media marketing certification through Bootcamp Digital. I'm a certified Amazon influencer, which is very, very hard to achieve. You have to have a specific following. You have to have specific analytics on all your social media in order to even be considered. And a lot of people they turn down. So I was very fortunate to get that. I have a lot to, that I still learn every day. But when it comes to pushing your business, there's certain things that I do. I use a lot of keyword-based tagging that is catered towards your specific business. So that's going to get people that are searching for specific things to find your podcast. I do what I call quick clips, try to say that 3 times, where I segment the podcast into various smaller clips for those that don't have time to listen to a long form podcast. So we'll put your long form podcast out there, your complete podcast. And then what I'll do is I'll basically segment that to highlight certain key points of a discussion. So, So if I did one with McHugh, I might say, and there was a segment in there where McHugh talked about how passionate he is for the paper. It might be a 5-minute clip, but I might have been inspired by that and think that people can learn from that. So I might segment that and put, McHugh David talks about his passion in the paper, and I'll put that out as one short clip. And what that does is somebody watches that and undoubtedly they're going to want to watch the whole long form podcast. I also target it. Look, there's no doubt about it. If McHugh's on my podcast, it's not going to benefit him a whole lot for someone in California to watch it. We want him to. Sure, that'd be great. But it won't necessarily benefit his business. So what I do is I boost that post on Facebook and on Instagram, and I target it within a certain area. So I might go Livingston Parish and 20 miles out in all directions. And so, 99.9% of the people that are seeing his podcast are going to be people that can actually do business with him. That's very, very important. There's also a lot of other things I do that relate to, a lot of people don't know. Everything you do in social media has a reflection on the analytical computer. So computer programs exist on Facebook and on Instagram and on YouTube, where if you don't follow certain criteria, they're not going to bump you up that feed. And there are tricks to those analytics. I'm actually a member of a board. It's a board online where they have people that go rogue from like Facebook and Instagram, and they will tell tricks to those analytics and how to get bumped up that feed. I'll give you one just right off the top. When you comment on a post on Instagram, you want to make sure you comment with 5 words. If you use less than 5 words in your comment, it does not even count as a comment according to the algorithm, and it will not bump you up the feed. So it did absolutely no good for you to comment if your end goal was to get bumped up that feed. Now, why do we want to get bumped up the feed? Because if you don't get bumped up the feed, less people are going to see it. You ever notice on Facebook, you have many, many friends that you never see them post anything? Guess what? They're posting. You're not seeing it. And the reason you're not seeing it is because Facebook is not seeing you interact with that person. I like a lot of posts. I'll go down and hit like on posts that I actually like. But a lot of the reason I do that is because I want to continue to see that person's post. If I don't interact with them, it's going to stop showing me their post. But guess what? The second I hit like and I comment, hey, great job, all of a sudden I start seeing everything they post. Pay attention to that next time you're on Facebook. That's a little trick for you. I won't even charge you for that. But that is something that...
was that a quick clip?
That was a quick clip. And that is something that that definitely is important, and especially with social media and interacting with those posts. But those are things that I learned getting all these certifications that I currently have.
So let's talk about full package benefit, right? So you're doing, we have talked now for 38 minutes about the before, the during, the after. There's a lot of work that goes into each individual podcast. Who's benefiting? I would imagine that it is both the business owner, or not even both. That would imply 2. Really, it's you, the business owner, and the community. So pull that together for us.
Yeah. So obviously the business owner is the key for me. What I want to do is I want the business owner to benefit from being on the podcast. My benefit comes on the back end of that, just from the aspect that I feel like I helped the business owner. Now, certainly it helps me in my podcast. It helps me get more views. Maybe Woody Everton being on my podcast benefited me because it lended me legitimacy. But my goal for Woody Everton to be on my podcast is I enjoy his podcast and I wanted other people to know about it that maybe didn't. And that's kind of hard to understand with Woody because he's so popular. But guess what? There's a lot of my listeners that were not familiar with Woody Everton until he did my podcast. So where he gained was he gained more listeners through me. And where I gained some of his listeners on my platform because they were listening to his podcast and thought, oh, I like Jim's podcast as well. And maybe they favorited mine. So that's where I benefit. The community benefits because of the learning aspect of that. Guaranteed, McHugh, there's a lot of people that want to start a business and don't know how. Guaranteed, there's a lot of people that are in a job they hate and they want to get out and really do what they want to do with their own business, but they don't know how. Or maybe they're not confident, or maybe they think nobody's going to want that service. I'm going to have people on this show that are going to kind of give you a map in order to do that. So everybody kind of benefits from that. And at the end of the day, we all want to increase business. But more than that, what a podcast gives you, and specifically local leaders of the podcast, is an outlet to where more people know your name, but I'll say it again, but they know your story, because every business owner has a story, Mickey.
So, want to run back through this list real quick of some of the stories that we're going to hear on local leaders coming up in the next. Actually, you're scheduled out pretty well over the next 6 weeks. So we have Dr. Donald St. Angelo, who is going to be on the show next week.
Advanced Dental Care,
thank you. Mr. Jeremy Powell from BJ Pawn the week after, and then also the day after that, Mr. Dane Arnold from iTrade Exchange, which is an interesting business to say the least. Getting into September, me. You'll hear
the
from,
most interesting of all.
Yeah, right. No, I'm not as interesting as some of these other people. I'm a little dry, but I will be the first full week of September. Then Mr. James Adam McCants from Sporting Center, Jamie Fontenot from Experts Pest Control, and then Miss Leanne Hasselback, who will be audio only later on in September.
Right.
So you've done some innovative things to try to help promote these folks, and you've talked about some of them. And you said that you've gotten these certifications and that, it's sort of, it has changed the way that you promote these businesses. You're obviously, you're very much into it from start to finish. How can people get on that train? If people want to sponsor, want to advertise, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, with anything, any sort of business, whether it be podcasting or building a house, there's costs involved. These sponsors essentially defray that cost or help to defray it. I mean, there's a lot that goes into podcasting that the general public doesn't see. There's some major editing done. There's a lot of time involved in sound, as you know. I mean, you engineer my podcast from the sound aspect and also the equipment aspect and those sort of things. And there's a cost to that. There's a cost to, the software that's involved. There's a cost to that. I use editing software on the video side. There's a cost to that. There's the time aspect of it. Probably the biggest part of podcasting is the time involved. Uploading, downloading. Yeah, I mean, the story. You can literally take, for a regular podcast, about 2 hours to upload it, about another hour to download it, and maybe another hour to edit it. And before you know it, it's a day process minimum.
Yeah, Jim and I work together quite often. He records his podcast here. If you've ever watched Local Leaders, that where he's sitting might look familiar. Sometimes we have a little farther back angle, but yes, afterwards we actually presented on this on Tuesday. Right. You did sort of the preamble, and then I came in with the technical aspect. But it does, especially some of the longer ones, it takes longer to process because you have to go through the audio, make sure it's clean, sync it up with your video. It takes a while, so there's a lot of process in this.
Yes, there is, and so there's costs there that I was telling McHugh earlier. I've been funding this primarily myself, and more than happy to do it. But the issue is now it's becoming popular and people are watching it. I'm getting thousands and thousands of views on my last several podcasts. So when you get those, your costs dramatically increase and your time increases. So I've had to kind of reach out to people and say, hey, would you like to sponsor a podcast? You can do that. I mean, I've got packages I've put together, but for, as little as $25, you can, what I do is I put your, whatever image you want me to put on there. And I do pretty much a 30-second commercial on James Adam McCanson Sports Center is one that sponsors us. And I do a little 30-second commercial on where they're located and contact information, all that kind of stuff. And we do that during the podcast, so it'll pop up and it's just a little 30-second promotion of you. And these are relatively inexpensive, just enough to defray the cost of the actual podcast itself.
So we've talked about start to finish, how people can help you. Tell us a little bit. You touched on it in terms of interactions. So that's how it helps with social media. I want you to touch a little bit more extensively on how people can help you spread your podcast. You spread paint, spread the word, Miss Stephanie.
Yeah.
How people can help spread your podcast and where they can find it.
Well, here's the most important thing. And this is the part, McHugh, that if you're not certified in 9 different things like I am in social media, you won't grasp it. But I'm going to tell you right now how to do it. So here's your tip for the day. Anything you're trying to promote through Facebook, you want to share it. The issue is I see people all the time that share memes, for example, and I love memes. I think they're hilarious and I share them too. Don't get me wrong. But I try every day. I kind of make it a goal to share somebody's business on my page. And I mean my personal page, especially. But I want to share somebody's business. And every day I say I want to help someone by doing that. Now, what does this do? I love it when people like my post on my podcast page. Love it. And that helps. It helps when they hit that like button because it bumps me up that feed a little bit. It exposes me more on Facebook. But what I'm after them to share that post, because if they just like it, none of their friends get to see that. Only me and them get to see that. And if they share it, their friends get to see it. And maybe they're going to want to watch that podcast. And then if they watch it, maybe they'll share it. So it becomes a big community thing. It's very important to get those shares. If you'll notice lately, I've been promoting, please like my podcast page, which is entitled Chapman's Paint Place Podcast, which is where I started. I'm in the process. I may end up renaming that Local Leaders of the Podcast, but the page won't change, just the name. But I have been really pushing people to go on there and like my page, because the more activity you have on that page, the more Facebook is going to bump you up that feed. But if you don't share it and you don't comment on it, Facebook looks at that as if people don't want to interact with you. And I know that can't be the case. It's just people don't think about it. So please, if you see a post, share it. If you're a sponsor of mine and you're paying money to sponsor, you definitely need to share it. It'd be crazy not to share it. You're sponsoring it. So you definitely need to share that post. But I'm asking that everybody that see that, let's help everybody in the community out and just, let's share Livingston Parish with the rest of Livingston Parish. That's the way I want people to look at that.
Anything you want to wrap up with?
You covered it all, McHugh. You're a great podcast host. I think you've pretty much covered everything. I do want to tell everybody you can find me on paintpodcast.com is my website. There I upload all these videos that I put on YouTube. I also promote upcoming guests. If you go there right now, you'll see a beautiful picture of Dr. Donald St. Angelo from Advanced Dental Care. And so he'll be my next guest that I have coming up. But you can go there. You can go to Instagram, Facebook. Matter of fact, just go to Google and punch in Chapman's Paint Place Podcast, and it will pull up tons of media for me. So you can go to any of that. Please, please, please like my Facebook. I've got a goal there. I want to get 1,000 followers in the next month. I'm at about 400 right now. So that's a lofty goal. But I know with your viewership and what you pull in, we're going to make that happen. So that's my goal.
Well, I would appreciate our listeners going and checking out his YouTube page, especially his website, paintpodcast.com. Please check that out. Please, if there's anything you can take away from this, understand the work, the effort, the time that goes into each episode that Jim does. It's very important. As he said, it's a community-wide thing that he is trying to do through his podcast. He's doing great work for local business. So, Jim, thanks for taking the time this morning. We appreciate you being here.
Yes, no problem. And I do want to say one more thing, and I'll plug the Livingston Parish News right here. So next week, I'm going to have a coupon in the paper. I'm going to have a nice little coupon in there where you can save some money on both the sponsorship, if you choose to sponsor the show, and if you want to do a full long-form podcast, there's going to be a coupon in there for those of you that want to take advantage of that.
So, yes, please check that out. We actually just finished doing the artwork for the ad yesterday. It will appear in next Thursday's paper, and it'll run about 6 times, which is the usual. We're also going to be discussing a digital presence as well. So I'll get with it. May have surprised you with that one. So, again, please check out. Right now, it's Chapman's Paint Place podcast, but the series is called Local Leaders. He is getting together with local business folks, trying to get their name out there because he knows that everybody has a story to tell, and obviously he does too. Again, Mr. Jim Chapman with Local Leaders, the podcast. Thank you, sir, for joining us this morning. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys watching today. If you're a business owner, please get in touch with Jim. Try to get on his show. And if you are a listener, please try to frequent these businesses or use their services. They are working hard. They're sending kids to school. They are participating in your local community. They are a keystone to this. And again, I also appreciate Jim giving me the opportunity to participate in his podcast process by doing a lot of the processing on the back end. It's a lot of fun. And it keeps my idle hands busy.
And he does a great job.
Well, thank you for that. Also want to, I guess take this time to announce that we do have some scheduled upgrades to the equipment as well as the podcast room. Going to try to get back into a more studio-like setting sometime in the next 60 days. We're going to be working on that. Again, my name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us for the Livingston Parish News Weekly Show. Remember, you can find this show on our website at www.livingstonparishnews.com/podcast. It is free. We have both audio and video versions for you to check out. There will also be a link to it on our Facebook page. We put it on Twitter and Instagram as well. You can also check out our YouTube. We do hope you guys have a great day, and we will see you next time.